Guys, boxing gossip here. Hope everyone's doing well. Last night we recorded the podcast. I've had a few new subscribers join the channel recently, so to those of you, welcome. Many thanks for joining. We do a 2-hour long podcast every Wednesday at 8:30. We go out live and then it adds to the channel afterwards. One of the things we discussed in that podcast, and there was a lot of breaking news, but one of the things we discussed was Joseph Parker versus David Price. And because there was a lot of topics and we ended up overrunning quite a bit, I possibly didn't go into detail on this fight to as great an extent as I could have done. And I actually think it's a really interesting fight. So I wanted to talk about it and record a separate video. In terms of being an established heavyweight contender, David Price has seemingly been on the scene a lot longer than Joseph Parker. We've heard David Price's name bandied about for years, whereas to the average boxing fan, Parker is a new phenomenon. Now, I've been covering Parker from very early on in his career on this channel, but I think it's fair to say Parker has hit the big time, if you like, in the last year or so. So I would suggest to the casual boxing fan, Price may actually be the bigger name at this point. But when you actually look at the resumes, Parker actually has the better level of wins than David Price. If you look through Parker's list of wins, he's got names on there like Carlos Takam. He's got names on there like Cali Meehan, Jason Petway, Bowie Tupu, Jakob Saglam. To be really honest, David Price actually doesn't have big wins like that. I know Price has been in some decent fights, but when he's been in those decent fights, he's lost. If you look at Price's big wins, it's the likes of Sam Sexton, John McDermott, Audley Harrison. We're talking English to British level fighters there. So I guess what I'm getting at is, even though Parker's kind of the new kid on the block, I actually suspect that Parker may well be the favourite here. Parker's got the better wins. Parker's got the momentum. Parker's got the undefeated record. And Parker has been very active and coming on win after win after win after win. So it's potentially an interesting fight, this. Just to give a bit of background, both of these guys were talked about as opponents for Anthony Joshua's fight on November the 26th. Eddie Hearn has been speaking to Team Parker. Apparently they like the idea of keeping their man very active, which ties in with what we've seen so far. Parker has certainly been an extremely active fighter. And potentially they're open-minded to fighting on Anthony Joshua's undercard on November the 26th. The idea being that fighting on that undercard would build a fight with Joshua substantially. Now, Parker's fighting on October the 1st, so there's a 7-week turnaround between his fight with Alexander Dimitrenko and this potential matchup with David Price. 7 or 8 weeks. So it is actually feasible that that is just about long enough. Funnily enough, Dimitrenko, you know, I've said in the past, I'm not sure Dimitrenko's the right kind of opponent to prepare Parker for Anthony Joshua. I certainly think Dimitrenko is the right kind of opponent to prepare Parker for David Price. For me, the similarities between Dimitrenko and David Price are far more substantial than the similarities between Dimitrenko and Anthony Joshua. So I could actually see this fight potentially being made. It's an interesting situation, and the promoter, Eddie Hearn, it would be in his benefit to get this fight made. If Parker wins, and Parker would certainly be the favourite, as I say, it really builds that fight with Anthony Joshua for the future. It introduces Anthony Joshua to the UK pay-per-view purchasing customers. It introduces Joseph Parker to that market. If David Price was to defeat Joseph Parker, it's the most solid win of Price's career. It would be Price getting a win over a top 10 competitor in the heavyweight division, and that allows Eddie Hearn to make a big money pay-per-view fight with the two domestic heavyweights, Joshua and David Price. So I think it's win-win for both. You know, and I could see this fight being made, definitely. Now, in terms of how it breaks down stylistically, David Price, very tall guy, very big guy. He weighed in for his last fight at circa 20 stone. In US money, £280. He's about 6'8", 6'9". He is a gigantic man. He would have a substantial size advantage over Joseph Parker. Price is the kind of guy who likes to fight long. He's quite rigid, quite upright, quite robotic, not very versatile. He's not an inside guy. He's not a back foot guy. He's not a body puncher. You could say, if you were being honest, that Price is a poor man's Vladimir Klitschko, and I'm talking a very poor man. But Price does have one major attribute, which is immense power, game-changing power. And I still sit here today genuinely believing Price is probably one of the top 5 punchers in the heavyweight division. If we look at the elite punchers, I think Vladimir Klitschko, Deontay Wilder, Alexander Povetkin, maybe Luis Ortiz, maybe Anthony Joshua. I'd certainly have David Price in that list. For me, Price hits harder than Joseph Parker at this stage. And Price has a chance against Joseph Parker because he's facing a much smaller man in Parker. And he's facing a guy in Joseph Parker who, let's be honest, is defensively open. Lesser fighters than David Price have been able to catch Joseph Parker hard and often and flush with big punches. Now, Parker seems to be a tough guy. He seems to have a good chin. But as good a chin as Parker has, I don't think any man on the planet necessarily has the chin to stand up to David Price if he's able to repeatedly land with that big right hand of his. So for Joseph Parker, it's a dangerous fight. It would certainly be the biggest puncher that Parker will have been in with to his career today. Price hits a hell of a lot harder than Dimitrenko. Price hits a hell of a lot harder than Carlos Takam, believe me. So if Parker is standing on the outside and boxing, which sometimes is what the style he likes to implement, he's going to have to be very careful with his distance. He's not going to want to stand at a range where he's within Price's distance but outside of his own distance, because Price will have a huge height and reach advantage. He's also going to want to keep his chin down and his hands up. None of this chin straight up in the air, no upper body movement, no head movement. If Parker does that, legitimately David Price can and probably will knock him out. David Price, he's not the most dynamic fighter, but one thing he does do is throw a straight 1-2. He's an Olympic medalist, he's an amateur background, he's quite robotic, he does what he knows what to do, and what he knows how to do is that long 1-2. Parker has got to be very, very, very careful. But Joseph Parker would have a substantial advantage in terms of speed. He would have a substantial advantage in terms of movement, fluidity, versatility, punch selection. And I actually believe that whilst Joseph Parker is a guy who in the past has perhaps struggled when the fight has got on his chest, you look at Carlos Takam, you look at that fight, Parker is dominating the rounds when he's boxing and moving, when he's throwing the jab. He's actually struggling when Takam is taking the fight to the inside. He's struggling when the fight is up close. He's struggling when Takam's putting him on his back foot. Parker for me is the kind of guy who needs range. He needs space. He needs time to get his clean, crisp work off. Funnily enough, for me, in the David Price fight, he's actually had to mix it up a bit. If he stands there and just boxes from range with David Price, he is at a disadvantage. He's smaller, he's got less range, and I believe with his defensive frailties, he could be very, very vulnerable to that Price right hand. What he's got to do is actually fight the fight in this kind of fight that Carlos Takam fought against him. I think he's got to close the gap because David Price panics when someone's on his chest. David Price panics when he puts him back. And I think if Parker can use his footwork, use his head movement, try and duck inside the jab, come in range, get off work to the body, get off an uppercut on the inside, I think he could drown David Price and stop David Price quite early, actually. It's one of those where the first guy to land floss in this fight could win. That's a cliche used very regularly in boxing, but in this fight I believe it's particularly true due to Price's lack of a chin and Parker's lack of defence. I make Parker a real favourite due to the momentum in his game and due to the versatility and speed advantage and momentum, as I say. But David Price is not without a chance here. Parker is a guy who likes to stand off and box. Parker is not a guy who, for me, likes to fight up close. And I think that's what he's going to need to do to be at his most effective in this fight. It's a real interesting fight. It's a fight I'd really look forward to. And it's a fight I'd make Joseph Parker a 70-30 favourite in. But it's not one I'd rule David Price out of. And I actually think it's a good fight for Joseph Parker ahead of a matchup with Anthony Joshua. It generates huge interest. It helps to big that fight. It helps to raise Parker's profile globally. And it gives him experience of a very, very big man who hits very hard. Dimitrenko, he's big also. He's tough, he's strong. But he doesn't have the power of David Price. And his game isn't overly dynamic. He's quite slow, quite plodding. This, for me, is a good prep fight for Joseph Parker. Let me know your thoughts, people. Is this fight a joke? Is it a mismatch? Could you see an upset here? How do you see the fight going? Leave your comments below. Is it one you're interested in? Is it one you're not interested in? Please do hit the thumbs up button. That will help spread this to a wider audience so I can hope to build things out on this channel. If you're new, if you're just checking out my stuff, please do take the time to hit the subscribe button. I'd really appreciate it. Many thanks for watching, everyone.